So you've got another finished piece here that looks like you've got some parts for over here too.
That is it's based on a Mackintosh piece, and I was looking at the piece. Original piece was painted white.
Oh.
And he did a lot of white stuff.
Okay.
And it's a different kind of thing
to
paint furniture like that.
Right.
And all those shapes and stuff are just front and center because there's no wood. It's white. You know, it's painted wood. But I really love those shapes.
Yeah.
And I was like, see, I could probably do that in wood, not paint it.
Yeah.
White painted stuff. I don't know how that'll look for my house.
Yeah.
I did one white piece once and it looked amazing.
Okay.
I'm planning on doing more because it is cool.
Yeah.
So I thought, oh, I could, you know, that's fairly simple. How do I make that sort of moon cutout, whatever you want to call it, that shape, but make it so I can repeat it, you know, because you can cut it out or you could basically carve out that stuff, but it's hard to sand into those corners and get everything smooth. That's a lot of time and work.
Yeah.
So part of what I like to do is figure out an easy way to make it and make it reproducible. Sure. Make it efficient. So you make a couple jigs, you can do the cutout, figure out a way to bring in that curve at the bottom edge there, how that'll fit in. So these are different pieces of wood, and I can show you the
let's see it.
So from the back,
okay.
I've got a couple of...
Looks like one of those wood puzzles.
Yeah, and that way I sand this separate.
Yeah.
I can sand in here, these edges I can get all nice and clean and smooth, get rid of any machining marks. And if it was a single piece where those were cut out, it's just, you can do it, but it's a lot of labor.
Right.
And now things start, you know, get a little bit expensive. Yeah. And a little bit tedious for me.
Sure.
Because, you know, I like to make it simple. And
this was a new design that you just thought, let me
play around with this thing and see if I can come up with a way to do it.
Yeah.
So I kind of didn't have a complete plan in my head when I started. I figured I could let these in somehow from the back. So it ended up being a kind of a, well, let's cut this part out. And I played around with a couple different ones, trying to get the right shape.
So that's really your creative process.
Yeah.
There's a point where you're like, okay, I've got these orders, but I've got some downtime right now. I'm gonna take
a minute and just play around here. Yeah. And these ones I didn't like the size. I forget exactly what I was doing. Maybe I was just practicing the cutout before. And then it's a matter of holding pieces in place to do it. Yep. And the limitations of how much room I've got with my multi-router as far as going back and forth and up and down and figuring all that stuff out. So I figured, okay, I can make that size. So then I cut a jig to make that shape. And that's what is on here.
That's fantastic.
So this is the shape that I attached to this template holder. Yep. And then I can follow that with a stylus. It's a 3/8 stylus, and I use a 3/8 bit, so I get the exact same shape. You can. So I'll follow this template, the custom template, to the other half of this shape. This is the other side. Cut it out, flip it to the other side. Right. Everything's lined up in the center. on that piece. There's 4 on that table.
And this is another jig that you made for this.
Because there's 4, that means let's make a jig.
Right.
So for the jig, really you need half of the curve. You don't need the full curve.
Yeah.
Because if you did cut it this way, your bit's coming in here, it's cutting with the grain direction, but when you come over here, you're digging into that grain.
Oh, okay.
And you could go slow or do what they call a climb cut, come in backwards.
Okay.
But that's a little dangerous because it wants to pull the piece.
Yeah.
And if you go against that grain, there's a good chance you're going to tear it out.
Yep.
This is a bottom edge, you don't see it as much, but if it was showing, you could get burn marks if you go too slow.
Yep.
So you're always balancing what you need to do. So I got the jig, I'll slide it into place, and then pencil mark both sides. So I'm going to cut the curve out, get rid of most of it on the bandsaw, and then I'm just doing a little bit with the router.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just going to come in on this side, and I'm looking at that grain. I'll probably stop before I get to the middle because it's got some weird angles. Mahogany has a lot of movement in it, so I'm going to, before I get too far in, I'm worried about it blowing it out, so I can, when I do this other side, I'll come in further.
Oh, okay.
That little curve. Now, because it's the bottom edge, it doesn't need to be quite as smooth and clean as other stuff that's going to show.
Yeah.
But, you know, you want it nice.
Sure. Yeah. And I noticed that even after you had routed this other side, you still didn't follow through.
I came a little bit, something was off a little, so I came a little bit further to try to even it up. And then I can just sand it smooth. Yeah, something was off a hair.
So, Mike, we went through the process of showing how we shape these. Yep.
Yeah.
So show us now kind of what the assembly looks like.
So the one part we didn't show on this, couple parts, was routing out for the panels that fill in to get that kind of cool, cool shape. And on this piece, because it's kind of wide, I do a floating tenon.
Oh.
So I cut a tenon in here, and I cut a tenon on the leg. On my machine, I don't have quite the stroke length to do a tenon on a 10-inch piece. So it's easier and cleaner just to do it like that.
Yeah.
It's a little less strong. A table like this is not a big deal.
Yeah.
On things like chairs, you need a little more structural integrity. It makes sense to do a true tenon.
So I get the idea of the floating tenon, but does it give it some room for expansion and the?
It doesn't.
Okay.
It doesn't. So you've got to be careful of wood widths and stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
This piece is kind of weird in its the way things are cut out.
Okay.
I figured that'll be fine. That'll work. So the floating tenon, and for strength, it's the grain goes this direction. You could break it this way, but you can't break it that way.
Yeah.
So then you've got that. So the way I would do this, things would be sanded before I assembled. I'd glue it all up. I'd do two sides all the sides are identical. So I do 2 sides, glue them up, let them dry, you know, in clamps. Hour plus to dry, and then I grab my next one. I'd have 2 sides, and then I just bring in the next one and do the final assembly. Like that. Same side here. Clamp that up. So it's a 2-step assembly process. And then on this piece, the top is attached to a lap jointed cross piece. So that's just pressed together. Again, it would all be sanded. I'd probably pre-drill to attach it to the legs. So you'd have a piece like that. That would go onto the assembled piece there. And that, I can show you what it looks like. This is one of those things that I kind of like the way it looks, but you don't see it a lot. It's underneath the top. I made the top close to the edge, so it's got a big overhang from the leg, but not a lot from that top structure. The original piece had something coming out there. I couldn't see it too clearly in the pictures I could find, but it did have that. So I wanted to include it. On there.
No, it's a nice, like you said, somebody that cares is gonna look.
You got to put it across the room to see it. They go, oh, he did that.
But you're making stuff for people who care about that thing.
And then the way that the tabletop is attached, it's with these figure 8 buttons.
Oh, right.
That allows, because it is wood, it is going to move, like you said. So that gives this top a little bit of room to move around.
And this is not plywood. This is hard wood, so it's different.
And it didn't talk about also all these pieces are mahogany. The fixtures, a lot of the Greene and Greene is mahogany. And then my finish, I use an aniline dye, which you mix up from a powder.
Oh, right. We wanted to see.
And shellac is my top coat.
We wanted to see. Do you have some like a little?
We could do a little.
See everything, but tell us a little bit about what you're using and then the process.
So the aniline dyes are one of the finish products that the original guys used. And on oak, it's great because it colors the flake, which is real hard. It picks up some color from the stain instead of staying real white. If you ever see a oil finished floor in a house, the flake is almost white because it just doesn't, the oil doesn't penetrate. But the aniline dye does, it actually dyes that. So I have like a brownish one, a reddish one, and a goldish.
You get your own
and then
concoction.
And they're powders, and you measure them out. So I do it by parts. And I've got a whole bunch of little sample kits, and I've used 3 or 4 that are kind of standard. So, and I usually spray my finish on the finished piece. And it's just a water base.
And this stuff will stain your fingers as much
as... it actually washes off your fingers before
look at that beautiful grain already coming out.
And this piece wasn't really sanded. We just grabbed it off the shelf because it had some good flake. But you can see the transit or the different coloring from the hard flake to the softer wood, and then the open grain, which picks up some of the darker colors. And there's different ways to stain using glazes that you can fill that in. One of the things that I do is, so I do my water stain. You let it dry, then you wipe off the excess, and then you kind of get a good look at what it's going to look like with the final coat of shellac on it. So when it's wet, it sort of shows a little bit more. We didn't let it soak in and dry as much. So it's not as rich, and it wasn't sanded, so it doesn't have as much depth as it would. So then after that dries, I'll hit it with a Scotch-Brite pad to knock the grain down because it's a water-based finish. So it, you get wood wet, it kind of fuzzes up a little bit. So then I'll knock it down with a Scotch-Brite pad, get it relatively smooth. Sometimes, for a tabletop, I'll wet it. I'll sand it, I'll wet it, and then I'll sand it again. To knock down that grain because you want a much smoother finish. Tops, arms, things that are more tactile on a piece. So you want to give that a little extra care.
Sure.
You could do the whole piece that way. Sometimes you get an extra grain, you got to hit it with the sand and then add again.
So the shellac is the final kind of coat.
Then the shellac goes on. Yeah. And then the shellac, I buy the flake, dissolve it in denatured alcohol, and spray that on. A couple light coats, sand in between, light sanding. And then finally, I use a pigmented wax for the final coat on top of the shellac.
Okay.
And that's a wax that's got, it's kind of the way they add coloring to shoe polish. So this is from Howard's, and I use the dark oak.
So when you are putting the finish on a piece, I mean, this is, you know, you talk about cutting all the parts and putting it all together. This is what takes the time.
Well, everything takes time. This, depending on the piece, like this one's got a lot of little corners.
That's true. That's true.
So it's a little bit of work. The spraying it on is a big labor saver. If you're doing it by hand, it's tough.
Yeah.
So
especially in the nooks and crannies.
Yeah. So I'm not a super finish guy. That's not really what I've, kind of. You learn to do what you have to do. Yeah. So I've gotten better at spraying, and you do light coats so you don't over drip and overspray. So and getting into these nooks and crannies. So it takes practice.
Sure.
But you get a definitely better product, especially the shellac.
Yeah.
You can't really screw up the water stain because you go back and wipe it. You can't overdo it.
Yeah.
And you can really add and touch it up if you need to. It's easy.
Yeah.
Shellac's a different story. It's a little less forgiving.
Yeah.
So then water stain, dry it, polish it up, spray it with the shellac, light sand in between, get everything smooth. Then you add the wax. So this stuff's got a little bit of pigment to it, as you can see. We'll put it on here. It's not really going to change much, but it gets into those grain lines and adds another little bit of depth to the piece.
Yeah.
You get a little more contrast between the flake, because that's not going to pick up any of the dark wax.
Okay.
The wax residue is left behind, but it's a thin coat.
Yeah.
So
but the pigment
working with the grain, some of that pigment will get into that open grain and give it that extra little
again, the contrast,
color.
right?
Yeah, adds a little bit of color. So that's why I use the dark stuff.
Yeah, that's great.
Then you let that haze a little bit, then you polish it out with a cotton cloth.
Yeah.
And then you've got a nice finish. And then the wax you can refresh it anytime you need to.
Okay.
Redo the top or whatever.
Yeah.
And this is great. It's got like a UV inhibitor. It's got some orange oil. It smells good.
Yeah, it smells good. Yeah.
And it cleans and waxes when you reuse it on stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Nice. That's great.
Howard's makes some great products. That one I'll stand by.
Yeah. So, Mike, this has been an awesome tour. Thank you so much for giving us a tour and spending time with us and sharing about your journey and kind of what you do on a daily basis.
Yeah.
This has been amazing.
Like I was telling you, it's not work.
It's great.
It's fun. Custom stuff. I get to be doing different stuff, working with the client, trying to figure out the best way to solve a problem.
Yeah.
Or they just hey, give me one of those.
Yeah.
And I get to make something.
Well, and you're putting beauty in the world. You're doing it here on your own terms.
Yep.
And I think that's a good lesson, a good takeaway.
It can be done.
Yeah, it can be done. That's right. And it's it just from your own desire to do something different. Yeah. And that's amazing. That's amazing. So, listen, again, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
Wish you wealth, health, and happiness, and your family as well. And again, thank you so much for letting us. And I know you like, yes. All the best to you.
Cool.